Welcome back to ACX University. I'm Scott Jacoby, and today I'm excited for a conversation with the cast and crew of what we call the cinematic audio production of New Arcadia Stage 1. Now, this production ties together not just the best in audiobook, video game, and animation narration, but it also features an immersive sound design and mood-setting soundtrack that adds up to the type of next-generation audio production that listeners love. I'm excited for this conversation today, so let's dive right into things with our cast and crew.
Hi, my name is Erika Ishii. I'm an actor you may have heard in video games or seen online playing tabletop games, and I play Jessica.
Hi, my name is Matt Mercer. I'm a voice actor in cartoons, video games, and do other nerdy things on the internet, and I'm excited to play Lucas Decker in New Arcadia.
Hi, I'm Sam Riegel. I'm an actor in the voiceover world, and I play Steel in New Arcadia, and I'm happy to be part of the project.
Hi, I'm Jake Young. I'm a sound designer and composer, and I did the sound design and post-production for New Arcadia.
Hey there, my name is Casey Trila. I'm a music maker. I composed the original score for New Arcadia, and really excited to be here.
I'm Eric Jason Martin. I'm an author, narrator, producer, director, and I did all of those things for New Arcadia, playing the role of Blaze.
So we're going to start things off today with a little bit of a one-on-one with Eric Jason Martin, wearer of many hats for this project, Grand Poobah, Buck Stopper, as it were, for New Arcadia Stage 1. And so knowing that you're at the helm here in general, I'm curious to go all the way back to the beginning. How did this project come to life? What was the initial impetus and inspiration for the book and audio program?
Yeah, in a very basic sense, it was, I wanted to write a novel. And that's a terrifying thing to do, especially the first time out. But I was coming from a place of strength because I was thinking about it in terms of, what will this sound like? You know, I've narrated many audiobooks, and so as a narrator, I had a good sense for how things sound, and also had produced and directed big multicast productions in the audio space. So with those as strengths, once I started imagining this novel as something that could work as a big, multicast audiobook that I could narrate, that took some of the pressure off, and I considered it from that respect. And then, of course, there was the story. It was something that I was passionate about, which was the world of, video games, sort of a virtual space. There's a whole genre called lit RPG, and I narrate a lot in that category. So this was a story that I knew I could tell. I was, sort of an expert in this kind of world, and it's something that I really had a passion for. So that was the way it came about.
And so, as you said, you wrote this with audio in mind. I believe you've narrated over like 300 audiobooks. So, approaching it from that space, I'm curious, did you do anything differently as you were writing it that you might not have done if it wasn't going to be in audio?
Imagining it in audio was a great shorthand for me, and it may help other creators as well, because I was thinking about it in terms of audio, I had to imagine what these people's voices sound like, which meant I was casting it, as I was writing, which gave me very specific choices that I may not have been forced to make otherwise in terms of, what this character does, what their wants are. But if I can imagine a specific person that I know and interact with and admire their body of work, then I can just more easily make choices. So it was helpful. It would solve story problems.
That's really interesting to learn. And so you mentioned that you've written other things. So, you're writing a book, you're writing it with audio in mind, you're approaching it that way. But how did you know that you wanted it to be multicast? You wanted it to have sound design. You wanted it to have a soundtrack rather than just, I'm going to write this with audio in mind, but it'll be a book and I'll be the narrator and I'll narrate the whole thing. Like, was that from the beginning?
In terms of, I knew from the beginning the project was conceived of this was going to be multicast, because that would take some of the pressure off of me as the author. because I could focus on that, because I have a career in doing those kinds of things. I enjoy doing that, and I think it's value added for the listener as well. It's not just going to be me and my words. It's going to be all these other cool people that you love, who are a part of this as well. So I thought that was, and even if you don't like me, you might like some other people. So I thought of it from that way of like, you've got an embarrassment of riches here. So, enjoy, sample the buffet.
You're such a nice boy. How could anybody not like you? Come on. It actually makes me want to ask the question. So you wrote with these people in mind. You were lucky and talented, of course, to be able to get them. What would you have done if you couldn't get a Matthew Mercer on board? You couldn't get an Erika Ishii on board? Like, what would have happened then?
Well, I mean, it would have been crushing, first of all. I would have taken a moment to thank you. I understand you're very busy. But then, it would have been probably, well, it would be finding someone else, certainly, because that could, as a creator, be like, oh, they, you can't take it personally if they can't do it or for whatever reason. And I've had, other projects where people can't participate, but you get somebody else, just like you would in any other, television or movie production. You cast accordingly. And I actually come from a casting director background. I did it for years professionally. So, I know all the different factors that go into it and how you approach folks. So that was helpful to have that background. But yeah, in terms of, if somebody said no, then you recalibrate. And in some cases, because I'm the writer, I have the luxury of tweaking it. So, if somebody couldn't do it, then you figure it out. This is all about, I approach this work generally in terms of problem solving, be it the story problems when you're writing it, the casting, the directing, how do you solve it? And how does your solution enhance help you tell the story?
I know that you've done straightforward audiobooks where it's one person performing it, and you've done performing and directing and all that for different multicast style projects. What are some of the big differences in the performance of something like this versus a more traditional one narrator audiobook for you as the performer?
Yeah. Well, in this case, I did perform all the parts. As though I would do a single narrator project. And the reason I did that was both to have a timeline, for a practical reason, so the editor could have a master thing to build from, and slot other people's voices in as we captured them. But that also helped me understand like the pacing and all of those things, so that when I did that first, and then I recorded all of the other sessions with the actors. And in those cases, in each case, wherever we could, we performed them as scenes, and I would be their scene partner. And of course, we had to do it over Zoom or whatever platform we could remotely. But the goal was to capture everybody's audio, to make it as naturalistic as possible by performing with them and then putting it all together. But in terms of how I approached this. It was similar in some respects to a single narration, like I would do for an audiobook I was cast for. In this case, we then added all of the other layers on top. And that seemed to be, there are other ways to do it, but I find that to be the most effective for me.
And you touched on directing this and having the participants in different places. I'm assuming that because of various factors, this wasn't one where we could get everybody in the same room and, sort of around a group of microphones and all that. But what was it like directing them?
Once even live, once you get a lot of people in a room, the complexity goes way up and the timing slows down. And I envision this as a kind of a guerrilla production in terms of, we're going to go in as quickly as possible, get what we need and get out, which minimizes everybody's time commitment. And for this, if we got everybody in over Zoom, as we're doing now for this panel, it adds to the complexity. So it's tough. I knew because I was the creator, the director, I had all of the answers. It was easier for me to just get people one at a time, both for their scheduling and also for the speed. And we would just knock through the scenes. We do maybe a couple of takes of each one, more or less if needed. Some people had narration. But we moved quick, and that was a priority for this, production, for all the parameters we'd set up.
So that point actually leads really well into sort of our last question for this before we start to loop our other performers in and expand this conversation, which is that, you talked about being inspired by the people that you wanted ideally to play these roles and writing towards them. When you cast this, and when you were writing it, did you consider how those people would play off of each other? Or was it all done in a vacuum to where, like, I want Matthew Mercer to play this character and, it may not yet matter who's going to play this other character? What's the process of ideating all of these pieces you want together into a whole?
Yeah, I think to some large degree it was interconnected in thinking about, the idea of an ensemble cast. Also thinking about, folks that I have, relationships with, have worked with, know their stuff. That was important for this because it was a personal project, because it's indie. And I wanted to work with people that I knew and had comfortable, and that I knew worked with the material. So in this particular case, yeah, it was, I know these guys, know this genre, love it, and, would be passionate about it like I am. And yes, I did think, well, these guys know each other too, so there's a shorthand. They're going to, they're going to have a relationship already. They'll know how to play together. Although, that said, there are people I'm pulling from lots of different disciplines, other narrators that I work with, and people from animation, and video games and comedy, as well. Very disparate places, but they all come together here. I did think about it with the big picture in mind, knowing that their individual talents would fit into the bigger picture as well. And again, some of these folks know each other, some didn't, but it was up to me to sort of connect all of those dots.
So moving now into the performance part of our production, I'd love to start with all of you. If you could tell me a little bit more about your background, what you primarily do, something people might know you from if they're not familiar with your main type of work, and what that brought to this audiobook production. Why don't we kick things off with Erika? Erika, how's it going?
Hello. Well, I have a lot of experience in video games. I specifically set out to do voice acting for video games since I grew up playing games for as long as I can remember. And I tend to book a lot of, badasses. And so I like to imagine that that's what inspired Eric to cast me as Jessica, who is a consummate badass, but has quite a lot of dimension to her as well, which I really
I can only assume that you attract a lot of badass roles because you yourself are a badass.
I like to give off that vibe. I've done well to craft that image for myself. But inside, I'm a bit of a...
Well, the best performances are always sort of dialing up a certain part of us, to a level that really plays for the performance, right? So I'm sure you're pulling out that natural badassery. Sticking with the theme, Matthew, how's it going, man? What is your badass level in general, and how it plays out in your other roles and this role?
No, thank you for that introduction. Unlike our previously introduced performer being the opposite of a badass, for me it is truly an acting challenge to bring a badass character to life. But in a similar rate to Erika, I grew up a huge video game nerd my whole life, burned through every system, through every stage of development, and so when Eric came to me with the idea behind this book, it already had a very near and dear place in my heart. And I've crafted my career as a voice actor for video games and animation, and whenever I have an opportunity to perform in a space that is very familiar to my specific personal interests and upbringing, then you have to run at it. And Lucas in particular in this story is very much of a comfortable space to sit in, a mysterious, uncertain whether protagonist, antagonist, ally, enemy, kind of a slow reveal of the dark personality. Yeah. No spoilers there. You don't know. We'll find out.
I love it. Great. Thanks, Matthew. So sticking with the theme, Sam, what's your badass level in comparison to those two, and how did you bring it to this book?
Yeah. Well, I could also do that sometimes too. But no, I'm a voice actor like these other friends, and also a bit of a nerd. I grew up in the 80s playing your classic video game systems and stuff like that. So I have a soft spot in my heart for stories like this. And my character in New Arcadia is named Steel, which sounds like badass. It sounds like an American Gladiator, honestly, which many people, when they see me, think, oh, that guy's definitely a former American Gladiator for sure. But he's not all one color. So like he presents himself as affable and friendly, and then as you peel the layers of the onion off of him, he's got some mystery and some secrets that I won't reveal here. But no, it was a really fun role to sort of dig into and explore the different layers of the character, and I try to one day be as badass as Erika. That's all we can all hope for.
It's what we all aspire to. Sam, real quick, what is your primary, you said you're a voiceover actor, what is your primary medium for that VO day to day?
So I mainly do animation and some video games as well, and commercial stuff when it pops up. But I'm also a voiceover director, an animation voiceover director. So I direct the voices for lots of different cartoons for Disney and Netflix and DreamWorks and all over the place. Cartoons for really young audiences and some adult cartoons or teen cartoons, and so I'm steeped in animation every day of my life.
Like you're just,
which is
great.
You're
just exuding animation. Beautiful. Jake, moving over to the more production end of things, just give me a little bit. What kind of stuff do you normally produce? Was this the first time for you doing something of this nature? What are you? And of course, what's your badass level?
Badass level, profoundly low, and my background is kind of this type of stuff. I do mostly post-production for podcasts and audiobooks that do a lot of like immersive sound design, with a lot of like processing, post-production work, a lot of like cleaning up of poorly recorded audio, especially after during the pandemic, doing a lot of cleaning up of audio that's recorded in situations like this. I am not from the animation video game world, but I am also an avid video gamer and animation watcher, and it was really interesting being on this project and seeing people's names pop up, but actually not as much people's names, sometimes people's names, and then sometimes people's voices was the first time that I recognized them, and being like, I've heard this person's voice before on like countless other things, and that was a really fun, like, every time a new cast member came in to be able to hear it and be like, I think I know what I recognize this voice from.
And actually, that's a fun game I played myself while listening to New Arcadia for my own enjoyment and for some research for this, was sort of keying in and being like, I think I know who that is. I think that's this person. So that's a fun game listeners can play as well. Rounding the corner here, Casey, badass level and general milieu of your work.
My badass level, along with Jake, also low. I'm a Libra for the most part, so I'm pretty even keeled, but I've got a little Scorpio in me too, so I can sting every once in a while. But I spend most of my time in a room by myself making music, so there's not a lot of confrontation happening. But yeah, usually I compose for film and TV, and it's in a world that's a little bit more organic feeling, like a human hand touching strings and plucking wood things. And it was really fun to switch gears and work in the world of chiptune, which is very synthesized, but in a very limited and basic way that is very fun to play with.
That does sound pretty exciting, and that's one of the things we'll get into is all the kind of cool retro vibe to some of these some of the soundscapes in there, and I just love the chiptune name. It's so appropriate for what that all sounds like. Tying it all together, we've got Eric Jason Martin, who I know to be one of the sweetest people that I have run into in this entire industry. And so I'm not going to fill it in for him, but, give us your badass level. Let's see if Erika still reigns supreme on the badassery. And, just give us a brief overview of what parts of this project, all parts, flowed from you.
Absolutely. So I would... Well, Erika is still the queen, obviously, but I would rate my own badassitude as medium. I'm pretty chill, but don't mess with me. But I mean, if you want to mess with me here, that's fine. That's cool. I'm just saying generally medium, since you asked.
I'll kick it over to Erika. Erika, was the prep for this work, for an audiobook, for a multicast, and even knowing it would have sound design and a soundtrack, was your prep work for this before you step into the booth different than the kind of prep work you might do for other forms of VO, or was it exactly the same?
Yeah, in most forms of VO, you don't get the script beforehand. That's changed a little bit during lockdown, because they have to send it to you anyway. But most of the time, you show up and you might not even know the character or the project you're on or really anything. So getting to read this whole script with all the descriptions beforehand was incredibly different as a process. I was able to discover the character earlier and then, make the choices as they went along, as opposed to a lot of times you just have to make a split-second decision up at the top and keep it consistent throughout. And then maybe you find out later that there's they're secretly a villain or something. But for this, it was all there laid out, which was very helpful.
That's so interesting because focusing on just the audiobook world, there's sort of an unofficial rule, if you how could you get in the booth without reading the whole script first? If you haven't read the script through first once or even twice and made your notes and made your little, audio clips for who your characters are going to sound like, certain audiobook narrators wouldn't even be able to perform if they haven't lined things up that way. So it's so fascinating to hear that what's a baseline for audiobooks was like a bonus for you in actually getting the script in advance and actually getting to perform. That's really cool. I'm curious if, knowing what you brought from your other forms of VO into the audiobook work, I'm curious about the reverse. Did anybody learn anything through the audiobook process? And I know we didn't hit Sam in the previous question, so maybe I'll put you on the spot here. Is there anything you learned through doing an audiobook in this way that you could bring back to your other work and would inform some of the other work that you're going to do in the future?
Well, I don't know about learning new stuff, but I did find this experience a lot like recording for a cartoon series, just because you have... I've done a number of audiobooks in the past where I'm the only narrator, the only voice, and like Matt said, it's super difficult and challenging, but it's a much different kind of challenge because you're balancing sort of the needs of the whole book versus just worrying about your own character, your own performance, and to that extent, this project was kind of like doing an animated series where you're just focusing on your character and what you can bring to that character and what personality you can, pump into it. The challenge, I think, with this and with animation in general or radio plays in general is you only get to hear yourself and you don't know the other characters who are in the scenes with you. You don't know what they're going to sound like. You don't know the level of energy they're going to bring to a performance or how fast or slow they're going to talk on a very basic level. And so you kind of just have to rely on the director, the person guiding you through it, the producer, and also just sort of relying on your interpretation of the script and your interpretation of the scene and hoping beyond hope that it lines up with whoever else is in the scene with you. Having heard it now all cut together with music and effects and all that stuff, it's really remarkable how well it came out, and it really sounds like we're all in the same room, and that we weren't recorded in different people's closets months apart, which is how it was recorded, and it's really a nice. The through line's great, and it really works together as a cohesive piece. So I think the challenges are less on the actor on this one and more on the person behind the ones and twos, the person who's putting it all together, which is Matthew Mercer. Matthew, go.
We'll get to Jake's contribution, putting it all together in a little bit, but Matt, I'm super curious what you have on this.
I was going to comment on kind of what Sam was saying a little bit, and also from different voiceover projects. It's a rare opportunity when you have the writer and creator present for the recording, let alone helping direct. Context is a very useful tool for a performer, and not every project gives you the joy and pleasure of having it. and you kind of have to make decisions and choices for your characters in a vacuum. It's very helpful in this project, Eric being the creator of the story, that if you have any questions about character interest, things to come down the road, what sort of intent there is for this scene or this interaction, he's right there. And that not only streamlines the process, but it makes you feel more comfortable as a performer and as an actor, and that everything will be woven together and the end point to sound awesome. So just going to throw more accolades towards Eric for being present, for guiding us through this journey as well.
Totally share those accolades for Eric. I'm curious for any of the performers here, understanding that you had the luxury of working with Eric and getting some of that feedback. I think that's somewhat unique to this production, right? You get to work with the creator, and because it's a multicast, you're only doing sort of your part, right? Assuming it's just you and you don't know the other people, what kind of performance they're going to give, what their motivation might be, what their intensity level might be. How do you play off something that's not there, right? Do you have somebody else sort of feeding you those lines? Do you say them yourself but then edit them out of the recording? It almost strikes me as, I've always wondered, actors, when you're doing a phone call, right? You're doing one side of a phone call, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Like, how do you play that one side of a performance without the other side, for our fellow creators out there viewing this that might not have the luxury of having a director with them, or having somebody else in there with the booth?
Yeah, I think there's not one set way. I think when we were all starting out, we probably did a little bit more reading with ourselves, or reading both sets of lines out loud, maybe, just to sort of get the rhythm in our heads first, before we would perform a scene, just one side of a scene. But at this point, me, Matt, and Erika, and a lot of the performers in New Arcadia are like, super veteran voice actors and actors in general. I think we can all kind of hear the voices in our heads, even if we don't know the person necessarily who's in the scene with us, like we haven't been told the cast list yet or whatever. I think we can still hear what we think, just based on experience, it will sound like. I know for me personally, like that is most of what I do when I direct animation voices, is cueing the actors to what the other lines in the scene might sound like, whether that's by reading them in, reading a scene with them. And Eric did that with us too. He would read scenes with us and read us in with lines. And he was a maestro that had all of the different voices in his head, be they deep John DiMaggio oboe type voices, or higher pitched Erika Ishii voices. Well, I guess she's not too high. I guess I'm the high pitched voice, aren't I? Oh crap. All right. Well, I guess I am.
Yeah, it's a lot of times you have to kind of guess, and it really is incumbent upon the director, as Sam was saying, to be able to say, oh, well, it's going to be a little more high intensity, or even have the musical cues in their head and say like, oh, there's like a lot of music here, and there's a lot of going to do a lot of Foley, so we need a higher intensity. And you just gotta trust it. You do a lot of theater of imagination, and let the director guide you the rest of the way.
So this is great stuff, and it dovetails with my next question, which is, how do you design your character voice, your intensity levels, the little ins and outs of bringing that character to life when you don't have anything visual? I think we touched on that before a little bit. I think it was Casey that touched on not having those visual cues, but for the actors, do you draw inspiration from movie, TV stars, famous characters? Do you draw it from, this guy sounds like Uncle Bob because he reminds me of him, some kind of cue? Matthew, to kick things off, how does that come about when you don't have much to draw on, creating it from almost nothing?
I think that comes from, one, your experience and preparation as a performer, because there are many different ways to come at character creation. There are impressionists who use various performer touchstones in well-known media, and then kind of mix and mingle. Some of the best voice actors I've met, a lot of their unique characters are blends of like 2 or 3 personas from film and television, and they create something kind of in that interim. For me, who is not an impressionist, I tend to think from kind of stepping into the skin of that character. I consider kind of what their goals are, feeling out what their life experience might be, even if it's just a few quick beats that I create for myself, and then what kind of attitude that would create, what sort of vocal timbre and pace of performance would work for that type of persona. And so, for a character like Lucas Decker, who definitely is used to having control, is used to being the one that sees the full tapestry and is desperately trying to goad the cats into fit where he needs things to be. That required a little more of a meticulous pace, that required an even tone and an intent to kind of make sure that everyone else at least can understand where he was coming from if they didn't necessarily agree. For me, it's more about feeling out where that character's coming from and where they're going, and then find what feels natural in that space.
Erika, how about you?
Similarly to Matt, I'm not an impressionist, and so all of my characters come from places of having to understand age and life experience, and there are different levels of badass. There are people who are a badass because they're very vulnerable and insecure on the inside, or somebody who's like very trained in combat, and so it's more. I come at it more as like the way that I develop, sort of an on camera character as well. It's and if a different voice manifests because of that, then like that's really cool. But and when you're doing multiple characters, sometimes when they talk with each other, you have to differentiate it in ways that might not even necessarily be pitch or accent. It has to be little subtleties of, mannerisms or confidence levels or volume or little ticks.
I want to start to loop in Jake and Casey and talk about, beyond the performance, putting this all together and how we started to piece together all these great performances along with the music and along with the sound design and all that to create the final product. So Casey, talk to me about the original score for this production. How did it fit together?
Well, I was working basically in a sort of isolation with Eric feeding me really great references. Is kind of what we jumped off from. So he sent me like a big list of stuff that he listened to when he was writing. So there's like Double Dragon, Final Fight, these like early beat 'em up games. And so those are kind of my reference for where to jump off from. And I sort of created rules for myself in terms of like, if music is diegetic, if it's coming from a source within the world, it needs to sound like it's from that time period, like it's from that world. So I limited what I was doing in terms of like effects and processing. I kept it to very like straightforward sort of raw synthesizer sounds, maybe a little bit of filtering, that sort of thing. So trying to imagine that I was a 1992 game programmer using like a music tracker. And then as it went outside of that world, I listened to some references like Donkey Kong Country that just have this amazing ambient score, and learning how they processed these and like created these sounds, kind of use that as a jumping off point. But it's all just built around trying to imagine, using those early sound chips, what sort of music someone would have created for this world.
That's so interesting because it sounds to me like a reminder of what an actor would do when they're trying to get into the head of a character, a role they're playing, in the sense of inhabiting that time period, inhabiting exactly what you're going to do there. Did you get method? Did you get like a 90s style mullet maybe, and some what were those called, Cavaricis, and any of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of just built into my character already. I'm a child of the 90s, and I'm just listening to 90s sort of theme songs and stuff anyway for fun. Just putting on Saved by the Bell or Full House, really eating some bad cereal, sugary stuff. Just putting myself in that nostalgic mindset. I mean, it was a fun balance of like following the fun for myself, like just using sounds that I had and like gathering all these different sounds from different sources. And then like working within these limitations that I sort of set. I wasn't like as hardcore as someone who would like go take a Game Boy and reroute it and code these things line by line. But I was, doing it in a way that felt fun for myself and creative, I guess.
And you touched on, balance and the right sort of mix between a couple different elements, which leads into my next question. I'm curious, developing the score and then balancing it with the narration so that, it's in an audio only format, but you want the listener to get like a strong sense of place, but not get overwhelmed. And I think my guess is you're trying to heighten the narration and not distract from it or overtake it. How do you do that balance?
I'm going to start this one, then I'm going to throw it to Jake because I never heard the narration. I had it in my mind in terms of like I was reading it, like where the music was going. I knew the scene, and I was using like things that I'd learned from like writing music for radio or something, trying to stay out of like speaking range, which hopefully worked. I don't know. But Jake had to take this music, which those synthesizer sounds, they're very raw and they really demand to be heard. So I'm really interested to hear like how he was able to balance, like dialogue and narration with that.
Jake?
Yeah. So there's a few different things that I did. I think firstly, what I was able to do because of the way that I got the music from Casey, there was like loopable segments. I think maybe that's a product of this type of music too, where you have like some repeating things, some developing things, but there's always like pretty clear rhythmic points that you can sort of jump in and out of. So what I was able to do is play with like how people perceive sound, knowing that if something is predictable and repeatable, they're not paying attention to it as much. So during points of long, elaborate narration, I would loop some of these more ambient, less busy portions of the track before getting to like a big developing crescendo or whatever comes later. Another thing, in case you mentioned this about trying to stay out of the way of like speaking range, I do a lot of EQing of music before I mix it with narration to sort of like cut out the speaking range of the voice actor. I do this on every project, so like a lot of people's fundamental frequency will be right around like 75 hertz sometimes. Eric's is actually quite low, so I scoop down around like 60 for him, and that ends up clearing a little bit of space. You can get more elaborate with it and pull out that frequency in the middle and leave it on the sides so that you have like a nice deep pocket in the center of the mix for the voice to be heard, and the set music and everything is on the side, so you don't sacrifice the energy of the music that, like, in case you mentioned it, that music like wants to be heard. It's like, it's very like fun and energetic, and especially during like sequences where there's building momentum, like you don't want to have it so quiet that you can't hear the music and you lose it. There's also playing with reverb, like you can toss it into a space and have it be a little bit more distant, which keeps focus on the vocals while the music is still present again, but a little bit like distant and separated so it's not distracting.
Yeah. I love the part about thinking through the actor's frequencies from a technical standpoint and avoiding those, something the listener would probably not even know to think about, but just avoiding that clutter in those certain sonic areas, really just allowing the clarity of the performance to come through. What other direction did you get from Eric? What other sort of touchstones like that were you able to use to really inform the music that you came up with for this? How much of it was quite that specific, and how much of it was sort of a general idea that you had more freedom to play with?
I think a lot of it was in like the story itself. Like Eric had created this world that's run by this company that doesn't want to spend a lot of money on music. And that was a big informer of like what the music sounds like, creating these sound-alikes almost, which is something I have a strange amount of experience with, like creating parody or like sound-alike music, like for a lot of podcast theme songs and that sort of stuff. It was a world that I knew a little bit, and I grew up like as a big Weird Al fan and knew that his thing was always like make it sound real and then like sing funny lyrics on top of it. But like the music itself needs to feel real. And so that was kind of my general go-to for creating any of this music here, was like make it sound authentic to that world.
Once again, steeped in the 90s. I love the idea.
Yeah, and it's such funny music because it's it inherently sounds sort of funny, but like people like us who have played these games maybe growing up, like you attach the story from the game to the music and imbue it with so much meaning and character. And like, it is so nostalgic to hear now, that, you know, there is some goofiness to the sounds, maybe just knowing that they're video game sounds out of context. But when you like, I don't know, add it to the story that way, it really like becomes a full picture.
Or not a picture, it becomes a full soundscape. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah.
Sure. I was going to say, too, in just recent years, you've seen this resurgence of like neo retro synth pop as a musical genre getting more and more popular again, both for those of us who grew up with similar, you know, like video game experiences as kids, or even a lot of young kids that are discovering it for the first time. And it, like artists like Arcadia and, you know, people that are doing really, really cool soundscapes and soundtracks that very much fit in this same vibe. It's just really exciting to see it kind of being reappreciated and then expanded upon and given its own new, unique, modern sound to it. And I think Casey hits a lot of that too in this soundtrack.
Yeah, it's something that I think we all like, or at least I did. I took it for granted a little bit, like though, you know, just like the Mario Brothers soundtrack at the time, I was just like, nope, that's just what's in the game. But, you know, looking back on it, it's like a very complex and beautiful arrangement, done with like the limitations of that medium, and it's done really well. Yeah, it's fun to be able to play in that world.
Something that I often hear from creators is that limitations can, in a strange way, actually be more conducive to, it seems like Matt agrees with me, be more conducive to your creative flow because, you know, staying within a certain lane can remove some distractions and maybe some lack of decisiveness that you might get into. Rather than me say it, Matt, you seemed very eager to agree. Does that strike you as something that came into play here?
I think with any, especially with like an all audio medium, the real strengths fall on the talent of the people that can construct these soundscapes, that can, you know, mix things properly and bring forth elements of the story and the atmosphere and the vibe of the music at the right points. So in the constraints of this medium, the real magic is in the nuance there, and the real, you know, talent in the post team is what makes something good great. I mean, across all forms of artistic media, I think those kind of, I don't want to say guardrails, but restrictions sometimes lead to ingenuity, that lead to people having to think outside the box and create creative solutions to problems and creating things wholly unique that maybe weren't intended to begin with. I can think of number of projects that were incredibly innovative and then were given the opportunity to no longer have restrictions and then fell apart. You know, sometimes it's the forced ingenuity can create something wholly unique that nobody was expecting.
Matthew, you've led me perfectly into wanting to loop in a little bit more of Jake and talk about the unique challenges of tying a project like this together and all the different voices and all the, you know, the sound design as well as the soundtrack. You know, what was that like? What is there anything that, you know, what's unique about it? What did you have to figure out on the fly maybe or work out how to do differently than you might normally?
I don't know that there was anything terribly different. I think a lot of the creativity of creating the world and the vibe fell onto the writing, the performance, and the music to capture this like environment. And for me, it was more about trying to make sure that, yeah, a little bit more of the technical side of things, making sure that everyone sounds like they're in the same space, making sure that everyone is sounding at the same level, making sure that the pacing is right. And those things are all kind of like just step-by-step things that I have to do. So it's making sure that everyone's levels are the same, roughly, and then doing some compression to get everyone's dynamic range in the same, like, rough space. And then occasionally you can do things like, yeah, adding reverb to people's voices to put them in a space. But it's a lot of... It's a lot of color coding. It's a lot of session organization. It's a lot of keeping track of notes. It's a lot of markers in the session. So it's can often be tedious work once you get to this stage. And I think that like you need to like give it a decent amount of time and a decent amount of patience and know that like your first time through, it's going to be a little bit rough, and then you're going to go back again and you're going to fine tune it.
When it comes to, like you're saying, tying it all together and letting those three things be sort of the pieces that guide everything, how do you know when you get it right? Or maybe the better question, your choice, how do you know when you're getting it wrong? What sticks out to you on either side that sort of points you in the right direction or helps you learn you need to reorient in that right direction?
In terms of like mixing all these things together, like...
Yeah, in terms of folding all the pieces in and knowing that you've struck the right balance or you've provided, the right, feel or tone for what's going on.
It's sometimes intuition of just like listening back to something and getting the sense of like, yeah, I'm able to follow the narration and I'm feeling like various emotions as I'm listening to this. Or sometimes it's, oh, crap, I just listened to the music for 3 minutes and didn't pay attention to anything that Eric said, so something's obviously not right here. Getting feedback also is really helpful. Like, I think that sitting in a project for like weeks and weeks and weeks, you start to lose a little bit of the distance from it and you like only know what it sounds like. So getting someone else to listen to it is really helpful. And I work with...
Is that
other
someone
people.
else, somebody like Eric, or is that someone else, somebody completely outside of the production for a totally new point of view?
It's Eric, but it's also, I have like colleagues that I work with on projects and I'll send them sometimes a segment, sometimes like a whole chapter and be like, hey, can you listen through this and tell me what you think? And in terms of getting it, like knowing when it's right, that's really hard because you can tweak it forever, right? Like I could have worked on this project for months and like I could still be working on it now and changing things and updating things. Like, so again, to get back to like putting in sort of like guardrails or restrictions on your process, like timing can be that too. And it helps you make decisions that like help streamline a process where otherwise you could spend way too much time working on it and never make a decision. And yeah, I think that it doesn't have to be like creative restrictions, that there can be other restrictions that help move you along and find your way.
There's that famous saying, right? Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think that really applies here. So as we wrap this up here and round the corner on this really, really fun and insightful conversation, I'm sort of curious, for anybody that doesn't primarily work in the audiobook space, is this a medium you plan to continue performing in? Maybe, really appropriate for Matthew, who's, got a few audiobooks under his belt. And then Eric, after that, I'm curious, writing-wise, what are your plans for continuing to write stuff like this and to do these really full-force cinematic audio productions?
Well, I can start by saying, just to say straight out, this was part one. It's envisioned as a trilogy, so I hope everyone will come back for books 2 and 3. I'm going to write them real good, so hopefully they'll be good enough for people to want to do it. But yeah, we're definitely, it was planned that way, and then after that, who knows what, but I want to continue to innovate in this space. It's just such a fun way to play.
Eric, before we jump back to Matt, is there anything you didn't get to do in book 1, either from writing or the production or whatever, that you sort of earmarked as like, I can't wait to get into this in book 2, as long as it's not giving away the secret sauce?
Yeah. There was a lot of, there's a lot of setup and there's a lot of characters and world building to do in book 1. So it was very patient and deliberate. So what I didn't get to do until, more towards the end was just really cut loose in a narrative way and just go, straight up, action and everybody going nuts. But in book 2, as we're planning it, boy, it's just, we're just going to hit the ground running and we don't have to explain a lot. We can just go. And so I'm so excited to just play more.
And so for Matthew, I hope you'll be back minimally for books 2 and 3 in the series. But other audiobook wise, is this something you could see yourself doing more of? Was it fun, satisfying, interesting, or is it a nice diversion from your general bread and butter day to day?
Well, last time I return, it depends on how nice Eric asks me. For me, I will say I'm lucky to be extremely busy. So the audiobook projects being a new thing for me is both finding the time and finding the inspiration. So for me, it's not just being an opportunity; it's about being a story and a genre and a particular type of book that excites me. And so when Eric presented this to me, it was like, I'll make time for this. So I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was a lot of fun. I think as far as, you know, the wave of where audiobooks are going, I don't think this is the way to do it, you know, going forward. I think it's a really great way to do stories that it works well for. You know, but there is also something about having an actor that presents an entire book front to back, and, you know, really is the voice that brings you through the story. And there's wonderful stories that, to me, are exemplified by doing a group record like this and doing that fully cast radio play, you know, multimedia presentation. I think for this particular type of story, with it being so genre specific and being in ways very intensely colorful without even having much color to it, all that only serves to make it that much better and that much more intriguing. So I'm excited to see where the genre goes in general, in both facets and all facets in between, as more people experiment with how to present stories. So and if more ones come across my way that inspire me, maybe I'll hop in to do some more recording.
And to anybody else in the cast, you know, is there something that you feel is like new or next in the audio space, something you took from this that you'd really like to, you know, kind of continue to be able to keep doing, you know, or if not, even just like what's next on the horizon for you? Like, what does the future hold?
Yeah, I think like what Matt said, this kind of style of audiobook doesn't suit every single story, but the ones that it does are really exciting to me, and I'm glad that more and more projects like this seem to be coming to market, because I really enjoy listening to, you know, not just audiobooks like this, but podcasts and radio plays and stuff that harken back to a classic era of radio where you know, you were really immersed into a theater of the mind. I really like listening to projects like this, and I hope that there's more of them. I hope I get to participate in more of them, and that New Arcadia goes on to do stage 1 and 2 and 5 and 7 and 25 and 92. You know, we'll just keep making one every 6 months until we're all dead. That sounds fun.
All right.
Sorry, Eric.
That's gonna be pretty intense on Eric if he's got to churn one of these out every 6 months. But you know, maybe you're talking about going back to the radio days. Maybe it's back to the pulp novel days, and you can hire a crew to just churn them out, and then maybe you'll have to clone yourselves to keep voicing them amongst all the other work you're doing. But I like where we're going with this.
I'm just looking forward to it being called Old Arcadia when we're all in retirement.
We'll get there.
You know, Casey, Jake, any other things you're working on? Like, what's next for you? What's the next big thing you're excited about, either in this space or just in whatever space you're working in?
I think it's just a very exciting time to be in audio. Like, audio entertainment has come leaps and bounds in the last few years, just as technology has changed. And I think a project like this, I think Eric has pushed it, audiobooks a little further in a cool way, and I'm excited for that to keep happening. Along with, like we were saying, like, it is nice to just hear from one person speaking for a long time and listen to their voice and get to know them as a person as you're listening to an audiobook. But I'm excited for this world too, where, yeah, it does let your mind play the little movie that's going on. So excited for more of that. Maybe audiobooks will enter the world of spatial audio, moving around a room. Who knows where it could go next. But I'm working on a podcast right now that will someday come out. That's in the same kind of world of radio play, but with improv as well and music. So keep your eyes on my website.
Is it something you can name drop so that we can look out for it, or are you not allowed to say yet?
Yeah, it's called Overbite, and it's going to be out on Stitcher in the coming months. So yeah, that's all for now. But,
Awesome.
Excited for it. Yeah.
That sounds cool. I guess, Matt, you and I should just mention briefly that we're part of an online role-playing game show called Critical Role. If anyone wants to check us out there, it's on Twitch on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific. Twitch.tv/Critical Role. Boop.
Yep. And based off of that a weird D&D show that we've been doing for a while. We have an animated series coming to Amazon Prime February 4th this next year. So keep an eye out for that.
Very cool. Very exciting. And so, Jake, if you would like the opportunity to share your next cool big thing on the horizon.
I am working with my production company called Mumble Media, and we are doing a number of other similar to this type of projects. So this sort of space that people are talking about wanting to develop, like we're trying to do a lot of that. So we have a couple different productions, some coming out on Audible that are these sort of like fully immersive, a lot of like people moving around space, a lot of voices, a lot of sound design. And then, I'm also very excited about another project that's also coming out on Audible that is a documentary about a orca that has been in captivity for a long time. So that's a more narrative nonfiction piece that has been really special to work on. It's called Tokatai, and will be coming out in November of this year. Yeah, and then in terms of things to be excited for, I'm really excited about this space, and I'm really excited about stories that develop in an audio medium where, like, for me personally, like where sound is like a leading sort of character, where the soundscapes tell a lot of the story in addition to any acting and vocalization and narration, but where sort of like the sound can be a character that's a little bit more prevalent, I guess.
That's great. And it aligns with your interests, right? So more, better art and some more work for you, hopefully. So that works on all fronts. Well, thanks so much for joining us. To everybody on this panel here, I think it was such a fun discussion. As I said, I learned a ton. I'm sure our viewers did as well. I just really love that, you've all got such great camaraderie, and I can see how all of that, even though you were separate, added up to a really great production in New Arcadia Stage 1. So just thanks, everybody. Thanks to all the viewers out there for watching, and we'll catch you next time on ACX University.